It was a bright, sunny afternoon in the middle of the city, and the streets were buzzing with life, people walking to their destinations, cars honking, and the distant chatter of children playing in nearby parks. The air was warm, carrying the faint smell of food from street vendors, and the rhythm of the city seemed calm at first glance. Among the crowd, a black woman walked with a confident stride, her head held high and her eyes alert. She seemed like any other person on the street, blending in perfectly with the crowd, yet there was something different about her, a sense of calm and awareness that made her presence noticeable without her trying. People passed her by without paying much attention, but for those who were looking carefully, it was clear that she moved with purpose, every step measured, every movement precise. Unbeknownst to her, a group of 5 men had been watching her from a distance. They were looking for trouble, the kind of mischief that comes when people think they can get the upper hand over someone who looks defenseless. They whispered among themselves, sizing her up, making crude jokes, and plotting what they thought would be an easy way to intimidate her. They assumed that, because she was alone, she would be an easy target. The woman, however, remained completely unaware of their intentions, or perhaps she was fully aware and simply chose not to acknowledge them yet. Her calmness did not come from ignorance but from focus, from experience that could only come from someone who had been trained to notice threats before they even arrived. As she walked, she passed by street musicians, small cafes, and market stalls selling colorful fruits and vegetables. The city seemed alive with energy, full of ordinary events and ordinary people. Children ran past her laughing, a dog barked at a passerby, and a delivery cyclist weaved expertly through traffic. The scene was perfectly normal, everyday life happening under the bright sun, yet for the 5 men, every small detail seemed like part of their plan. They were already imagining how this encounter would play out, confident in their ability to scare her. They did not notice the way she scanned her surroundings subtly, how her eyes flicked to each shadow, each movement, each person around her, analyzing the situation without seeming tense. The woman's calm and composed demeanor drew a stark contrast to the restless energy of the men. While they were animated, moving nervously between each other and whispering, she moved smoothly, almost as if the city itself had slowed down for her. Every sound, every glance, and every motion in the environment was processed effortlessly in her mind. She had learned, through years of intense training and experience, to trust her instincts and remain fully aware of her surroundings. The small things that people usually overlooked, like a footstep slightly out of rhythm or a shadow moving too quickly, were details she noticed immediately. To anyone else, it seemed like she was simply walking peacefully through the city, but she was ready for anything, mentally prepared for situations that most people could never even imagine. The men continued to follow her, slowly closing the distance as they whispered plans and exchanged smirks, still convinced that they had control over the situation. They thought she was unaware, that she was just another ordinary woman who could be startled, threatened, or intimidated. Yet with every step she took, she was already calculating, assessing the environment, and preparing herself for whatever might happen next. The sun reflected off the buildings around her, casting long shadows on the pavement, but she was unshaken. She walked as if the world itself could not disturb her focus, each step demonstrating the quiet strength she carried inside. Even the passers-by seemed oblivious to the brewing danger. People smiled at street performers, chatted with friends, or checked their phones, unaware that a tense encounter was slowly unfolding just a few meters away. The contrast between the ordinary calm of the city and the tense anticipation building in the minds of the 5 men created an almost cinematic feeling. The audience, if watching from above, could sense the imminent confrontation, even though no one else in the city could. The scene was set perfectly, a sunny day, a bustling city, and a woman who looked ordinary but was anything but. Her presence alone created a tension that was invisible to most but palpable to those paying attention. In this ordinary urban environment, life went on around her, completely unaware of the storm about to erupt. Every sound, every movement, every casual glance became part of the backdrop for what would soon turn into an extraordinary encounter. The calm of the city and the chaos of the men's intentions collided silently, creating a moment charged with suspense, anticipation, and intrigue. The woman, walking through this lively cityscape, was completely in control, even if no one else realized it yet. The woman had been walking for a few minutes, her steps measured and confident, her mind calm yet alert. She noticed the subtle shifts in the street, the way people glanced at her without really seeing her, the distant honks of cars, the rhythm of city life moving all around her. But amid the ordinary sounds and sights, she could feel it, a change in the energy nearby. She sensed the presence of the 5 men who had been watching her from a distance. They were no longer hidden in the crowd. Now, they were stepping closer, their eyes locked on her, moving as if drawn by some reckless curiosity and dangerous intent. The men closed in slowly, walking in a casual formation as if nothing was happening, trying to make their approach seem unnoticed. Yet every movement they made spoke of aggression, tight jaws, shifting shoulders, and subtle glances at each other, silently communicating a plan. They were convinced that this woman, walking alone in the middle of the street, was just another ordinary person. They imagined her hesitating, looking nervous, maybe even begging to be left alone. What they didn't realize was that she had already anticipated their actions before they had taken a single step toward her. As they drew nearer, one of the men took a slightly bolder step, closing the distance between them. He called out, his tone trying to be casual but failing, "Hey, lady, where are you headed?" His words were meant to intimidate, to provoke a reaction, but she didn't flinch, didn't even glance directly at him. Instead, she continued walking, her eyes scanning the surroundings casually, yet every muscle in her body was ready. She noticed small details, the uneven pavement, the edge of a nearby fire hydrant, the slight breeze that could carry a sound from across the street. Every sense was alert. The other men, sensing her lack of response, exchanged frustrated looks. One of them stepped forward more aggressively, trying to block her path. "You're walking too fast. We need to talk," he said, forcing a tone of authority that he hoped would unnerve her. But she stopped for only a fraction of a second, planting her feet firmly on the ground. Her body language shifted subtly, her shoulders squared, her stance slightly widened, a silent warning that she was not as easy to intimidate as they believed. To an untrained eye, it looked like nothing, but for anyone who knew, it was the body language of someone who could handle danger effortlessly. The tension grew with every passing second. The city around them continued its rhythm, cars rolled by, people laughed, unaware of the brewing storm on the sidewalk. The woman turned her head just enough to observe the men without seeming obvious. Their nervous energy was palpable. One of them whispered something to the others, a mix of bravado and uncertainty, trying to maintain control over a situation that was already slipping from their grasp. But she didn't react emotionally. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even speed up. She simply remained calm, exuding a quiet confidence that was almost unnerving. Then, the first physical movement occurred. One of the men tried to step in front of her, blocking her path entirely. He expected her to stop, to stumble, or at least to back away. But she didn't. Instead, she shifted her weight subtly, a movement so precise it would have gone unnoticed by most. Her hand brushed against her bag in a manner that was casual, yet every second of her action was deliberate. The men were still convinced they had the upper hand, still underestimating her entirely. Their plan, which had seemed so simple, was unraveling without them even realizing it. The tension between them was now palpable, almost electric. Passers-by noticed the confrontation, some slowing down to watch, sensing something unusual, though they couldn't yet put a finger on it. The woman's calm defied the growing threat, her gaze steady, her posture firm. The 5 men were caught in a mix of fear and arrogance, confident enough to act, hesitant enough to realize that something wasn't right. And at that exact moment, it became clear that this was no ordinary encounter, and no ordinary woman. The city, oblivious to the danger, provided the perfect backdrop for what would soon escalate into an extraordinary confrontation, one that none of them would forget. The 5 men, still convinced that the woman before them was nothing more than an easy target, began to feel a mix of frustration and overconfidence. They whispered among themselves, trying to decide who would make the first move. Their arrogance was almost tangible, like a cloud hovering over the sidewalk, blocking them from seeing the reality of the situation. Each of them had convinced themselves that this would be a simple encounter, a display of dominance over someone who looked calm, alone, and unassuming. They laughed quietly, exchanged smirks, and made crude remarks, believing that intimidation would be enough to make her break. But the woman's calmness was not ignorance. Every small gesture she made, every step, every glance was controlled and deliberate. While the men plotted recklessly, she was observing silently, analyzing their behavior with sharp precision. She noticed how they shifted their weight from one foot to the other when nervous, how their hands twitched as if itching for confrontation, and how their eyes darted constantly, betraying both anticipation and doubt. To an ordinary person, these details would have gone unnoticed, but to her trained eyes, they revealed exactly how each of them would react under pressure. The tallest man of the group, clearly trying to assert himself as the leader, stepped forward and sneered. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice carrying an edge of mockery. He assumed that his size and bravado would intimidate her, that she would hesitate or step back. Yet she didn't flinch, didn't even raise an eyebrow. She simply kept walking at the same steady pace, her eyes forward but subtly scanning the environment. She radiated control, the kind that comes from years of rigorous training and mental discipline. The men's underestimation fueled their reckless confidence. One of them decided to make a sudden move, attempting to cut her off entirely by stepping directly in her path. He chuckled, thinking he was clever, imagining her startled reaction. But she didn't hesitate. With a subtle shift of her weight and a slight pivot of her foot, she bypassed him effortlessly, as if she had anticipated the move before it happened. The man stumbled slightly, a small, almost imperceptible loss of balance, but enough to chip away at his self-assurance. He didn't realize that this brief moment had revealed just how wrong he was about her. Another man, sensing that things were not going entirely as planned, whispered to his companions, suggesting they try a more intimidating approach. "Come on, make her listen," he muttered. Yet even as he spoke, his nervous energy betrayed him. His body language became stiff, his gestures sharp, and his eyes constantly flicked to her, measuring her every movement. The woman noticed all of this effortlessly. Each micro-expression, each slight change in posture, told her everything she needed to know about their confidence and their fear. The street around them seemed to pause for a brief moment, the hum of the city fading into the background as the tension grew. Passers-by slowed down, sensing something unusual, but they didn't yet comprehend the danger. The 5 men were completely focused on her, convinced that their numbers and bravado would guarantee control. Their arrogance blinded them to the possibility that she was not an ordinary woman, that she possessed skills, discipline, and instincts far beyond anything they had encountered before. What made their underestimation even more dangerous was that it made them predictable. Every aggressive gesture, every attempt to intimidate, followed a pattern they couldn't hide. They didn't realize that each move they made was feeding into her assessment, allowing her to plan several steps ahead. She could anticipate their reactions, understand their weaknesses, and prepare herself for whatever might come next. In their arrogance, the men had already handed her the advantage without even realizing it. As the tension built, the woman slowed her pace slightly, giving just enough attention to each of them to confirm her calculations. The 5 men, still thinking they controlled the situation, had no idea how precarious their position had become. They saw a calm, composed woman, and they thought her stillness was fear. In reality, it was the opposite. It was readiness, precision, and control. Their underestimation had placed them directly in the path of someone who was more than capable of handling every threat they could present. In that moment, it became clear that the story of this encounter would not unfold as the men had imagined. Their confidence, arrogance, and lack of awareness had blinded them, and the calm, collected woman walking past them held the upper hand in ways they could not yet comprehend. The city, bustling and unaware around them, had become the stage for a confrontation that would expose the danger of underestimating the strength and skill hidden behind an ordinary appearance. As the men closed in, convinced that their confidence and numbers would intimidate the woman, she continued to walk with her usual calm and composed stride, giving no hint of fear. Yet, subtle clues in her movements, her posture, and the way she interacted with the environment began to reveal something extraordinary to anyone paying attention. It was almost imperceptible, but the air around her seemed to shift with a quiet intensity. Every step she took was precise, her feet landing softly yet firmly on the pavement, as if she was aware of every detail beneath her soles. The men, absorbed in their arrogance, did not notice these details, but each one was a silent testament to her discipline and training. Her eyes, while seemingly casual, constantly scanned the environment. She noted the distance of a fire hydrant from the curb, the way shadows stretched across the street from the buildings, and the patterns of pedestrian movement. To anyone else, it would have looked like a woman simply observing the street, but in reality, she was assessing potential threats, calculating escape routes, and mentally mapping the area. She was aware of every minor detail, the angle of sunlight reflecting off a car window, the sound of a distant bicycle bell, even the faint murmur of voices in a nearby cafe. These were all small pieces of information she could use to maintain control over any sudden danger. Her stance was another subtle clue to her extraordinary training. While she walked at a natural pace, there was an underlying stability to her movements, a readiness in the slight bend of her knees and the way her shoulders were squared. It was not a casual posture but a balanced, prepared stance, one that allowed her to pivot or react instantly if necessary. Each movement was economical, conserving energy while remaining ready for action, a hallmark of someone trained to handle physical confrontation. The men remained oblivious, mistaking her composure for vulnerability. Even her hands, relaxed yet controlled at her sides, gave subtle hints of her readiness. She wasn't fidgeting, holding a phone, or distracted in any way. Instead, her hands were positioned in a way that allowed for quick action if needed, demonstrating control over her own body and over the potential situation. It was a physical language that spoke of countless hours of training, discipline, and experience, skills honed to perfection over years of rigorous practice. The woman's awareness extended beyond just the physical environment. She could sense the body language of the men following her. One of them tapped nervously on his leg, a small movement that revealed impatience and uncertainty. Another shifted his weight from foot to foot, betraying his lack of confidence despite his attempts to appear aggressive. A third leaned slightly forward, as if trying to anticipate her reaction, unknowingly making himself predictable. Every subtle movement of theirs was being catalogued in her mind, giving her a precise understanding of how each would react if the confrontation escalated. Her breathing remained steady, another subtle clue of her extraordinary training. While tension mounted around her, she maintained a calm rhythm, each breath controlled, keeping her mind clear and her reflexes sharp. It was a quiet but powerful signal. She was in control, mentally and physically prepared for anything. This discipline and self-control gave her an invisible advantage over the 5 men, whose own panic and arrogance were beginning to cloud their judgment. Even the way she navigated the city streets revealed skill and experience. She avoided sudden obstacles with effortless grace, sidestepping a loose piece of pavement or a small street sign without breaking her stride. Her movements were smooth, deliberate, and efficient, a perfect blend of awareness and precision. These were the subtle cues of someone trained for real-world challenges, someone whose reflexes and instincts were honed to react instantly to danger. To anyone watching carefully, it was becoming clear that this was no ordinary woman. The way she moved, the way she observed, and the quiet confidence radiating from her all pointed to a person who had undergone rigorous training, someone whose abilities went far beyond normal human expectations. Yet to the men who had targeted her, all of this went unnoticed. Their arrogance blinded them to the truth. They were following a Navy Commando, someone whose skill set could neutralize threats with calculated precision, someone who had already anticipated every possible scenario in her mind. As she continued to walk, blending seamlessly with the bustling city around her, the tension grew. Every subtle movement, every precise step, every controlled glance was a silent warning, though it remained invisible to those who underestimated her. The stage was now perfectly set, and the hidden strength behind her calm demeanor promised that the ordinary encounter the men had imagined was about to transform into something extraordinary, a confrontation they could not possibly have foreseen. The moment came almost suddenly, yet it had been building quietly with each step, each glance, and each subtle movement in the city streets. The 5 men had been following the woman, thinking they had her completely figured out, each one believing that a small show of force would be enough to intimidate her. They had underestimated her composure, her awareness, and most importantly, her skill. Their arrogance was a dangerous mistake, one that would soon cost them more than just embarrassment. It began with the smallest gesture. One of the men, feeling particularly bold, decided to step directly into her path, blocking her way completely. "Hey, you think you can just walk past us?" he snapped, trying to sound menacing. But there was a sharpness in his voice, a tension that betrayed his own nervousness. The other men shifted closer, forming a loose circle, confident that their numbers would overwhelm her. They saw her as a single, ordinary woman, unaware of the extraordinary reality. The woman stopped for a fraction of a second, planting her feet firmly on the pavement. That small pause was enough to create a moment of suspense that seemed to stretch endlessly for anyone watching. Then, almost imperceptibly, she adjusted her stance. Her knees bent slightly, her shoulders squared, and her body shifted with perfect balance. To an untrained eye, it looked like a casual adjustment. To anyone paying attention, it was the poised readiness of someone trained to react instantly, someone who could control the flow of a confrontation with minimal effort. The man who had blocked her path reached out, attempting to grab her arm, thinking that physical contact would finally provoke fear. But before his hand could even make full contact, she moved. Not wildly, not with panic, but with calculated precision. She sidestepped slightly, twisting her body in a way that used his own momentum against him. He stumbled forward, off balance, his eyes wide in shock. In that split second, the other 4 men froze, unsure of what was happening. Their confidence, so carefully built over minutes of arrogance, began to crumble. The woman didn't strike aggressively. She didn't need to. The simple act of redirecting the man's movement was enough to establish dominance, a silent demonstration of control and skill. It was a movement born from years of training, years of anticipating danger, and years of mastering the art of reaction. The city around them continued its ordinary rhythm, unaware of the tense encounter unfolding on the sidewalk, the sound of distant cars and chattering pedestrians contrasting sharply with the sudden shock experienced by the men. One of the other men tried to regain control. He took a step forward, aiming to intimidate her with his presence. But she was already several steps ahead in her mental calculations. She moved with a speed and precision that left the men scrambling to react. A quick pivot, a subtle shift of weight, and suddenly the man was off balance, his foot catching on the curb as he tried to steady himself. The other 3 watched in disbelief, their bravado faltering as the realization sank in, this woman was not ordinary, and she was more than capable of handling them. The tension escalated in a way that felt almost cinematic. The woman's eyes scanned the group, noting their body language, their weaknesses, and their hesitation. She didn't need to shout, to threaten, or to strike. Every micro-movement, every controlled step, communicated authority, skill, and confidence. The men, on the other hand, were floundering, their arrogance turning to confusion and fear. They had walked into this situation believing they were predators, only to discover that they had become the prey in a silent, invisible battle they had no idea they were fighting. Finally, the leader of the group tried to assert himself, lunging forward with an aggressive gesture. But she anticipated it effortlessly, sidestepping and using a controlled push that sent him stumbling past the others, nearly colliding with a parked car. The sheer speed and precision of her movements left the remaining men frozen, unsure whether to attack or retreat. The moment had arrived when the reality could no longer be denied, this was no ordinary woman. She was highly trained, supremely confident, and capable of turning the situation completely on its head with minimal effort. In that instant, the city seemed to hold its breath. The ordinary street, the casual pedestrians, the sunlight bouncing off buildings, it all became part of the stage for an extraordinary revelation. The woman, calm and composed, had transformed an ordinary confrontation into a silent demonstration of mastery, showing the men exactly what happens when arrogance meets true skill. The turning point was clear: the hunters had become the hunted, and the quiet, unassuming woman had taken full control of the encounter, leaving the 5 men stunned, humiliated, and completely unprepared for what came next. The street had fallen into an almost surreal silence, broken only by the distant hum of cars and the occasional murmur of oblivious pedestrians. The 5 men who had thought themselves in control now stood frozen, their earlier arrogance replaced by confusion, fear, and disbelief. They had come expecting to intimidate a lone woman in broad daylight, to assert their dominance, and perhaps even enjoy the thrill of confrontation. Instead, they had been met with precision, calmness, and skill that far exceeded anything they could have imagined. It was at this precise moment that the true identity of the woman became undeniable. The subtle clues that had hinted at her extraordinary abilities, the poised stance, the measured steps, the awareness of every movement around her, suddenly made sense. This was no ordinary civilian walking through the city. She moved with a controlled authority, her actions deliberate and perfectly executed, revealing the unmistakable discipline of someone who had trained extensively in the most demanding environments. The realization struck the men like a punch to the gut. Their minds struggled to process it. One of them whispered, almost incredulously, she's trained, but the words barely formed before another staggered back, eyes wide with shock. They could no longer see her as an ordinary woman. Every casual motion now screamed experience, every small gesture a testament to intense preparation and discipline. The air itself seemed to shift, the tension now palpable, as the truth slowly settled in. She didn't need to shout or make threats. Her presence alone commanded authority. The subtle but unmistakable aura of someone who had faced danger countless times radiated from her, enveloping the men in a silent force they could not resist. They realized, too late, that they had underestimated the wrong person, that their confidence and arrogance had blinded them to the reality standing before them. Their bravado melted away under the weight of her calm control. One man, trying to reclaim some sense of power, took a step forward, but she didn't even glance at him. Instead, she allowed her body language to do all the talking. Her posture, precise and unwavering, conveyed mastery and confidence. Every micro-movement she made, the slight adjustment of her feet, the way she shifted her weight, communicated a single message: she was in control, and any further aggression would be met with consequences they were not prepared for. The remaining men took hesitant steps back, suddenly aware that the balance of power had shifted completely. Then, almost casually, she reached into her bag, not in panic, not in fear, but with deliberate intent. The movement was smooth, practiced, and efficient, a reflection of countless hours of rigorous training. The men could now see it clearly: this woman was a Navy Commando, trained for high-stakes situations, capable of handling threats with precision and calm efficiency. Their disbelief turned to alarm, their previous confidence now replaced by a raw, primal fear. The truth was undeniable, and the realization hit harder because it was unexpected. They had expected vulnerability, they found formidable expertise. The city continued around them, unaware of the extraordinary revelation unfolding in its midst. Passers-by glanced curiously, sensing tension but unable to comprehend the extraordinary skill displayed in plain sight. For the woman, however, nothing had changed in her demeanor. She remained calm, poised, and fully aware of her surroundings, projecting an aura of confidence that was both intimidating and awe-inspiring. Her training, experience, and discipline were now clear to anyone paying attention, and the 5 men were forced to confront the reality: they had challenged someone far beyond their comprehension. As she stood there, the moment of revelation settled over the scene like a quiet storm. The 5 men, once full of arrogance and confidence, now struggled to regain composure. They had come seeking dominance and control, only to discover that their target was a highly trained Navy Commando. Every plan they had formulated, every expectation they had, crumbled in the face of her skill, discipline, and unshakable composure. The realization was profound and humbling. Appearances could be deceiving, and true strength often hides in plain sight. With the reveal complete, the woman took a slow, deliberate step forward, demonstrating that she was fully capable of action but had chosen restraint. The men now understood the gravity of the situation, their fear mixed with awe. The stage had shifted entirely, and it was clear to everyone present that this encounter had become a lesson in underestimation, discipline, and respect for strength. The Navy Commando stood victorious, not through aggression, but through mastery, control, and an unshakable presence that left no doubt in anyone's mind who truly held power in that moment. The moment of revelation had passed, yet the air on the street remained charged with tension. The 5 men stood frozen, their faces pale, their earlier arrogance evaporated like mist under the sun. They had come with the intention of intimidation, thinking a lone woman in broad daylight was an easy target. Instead, they had been completely outmatched, their assumptions shattered in a matter of seconds. The city moved around them as if nothing had happened, cars passed, people chatted, and a cyclist rang his bell as he weaved through traffic, but for those involved, time seemed to slow, every second stretching with the weight of what had just occurred. The woman, calm and composed, adjusted her bag slightly and continued walking at a measured pace. There was no rush, no sense of panic, only the quiet assurance of someone who had handled countless high-stakes situations before. She gave the impression that she could have escalated the confrontation at any moment but chose restraint, demonstrating control over not only her surroundings but also over the 5 men who had misjudged her so completely. Their shock and fear were palpable, a silent testament to the lessons they had learned in the brief encounter. Each man reacted differently. One stood rooted to the spot, staring after her with disbelief etched into his features. Another shuffled backward, mumbling under his breath, trying to make sense of how they had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. The leader of the group rubbed the back of his neck, his chest tight with frustration and humiliation. He had underestimated someone based solely on appearances, and the realization stung deeply. Their bravado, once their shield, now lay in tatters. Even the bravest among them now hesitated, realizing that confidence without awareness and skill was no protection at all. Passers-by who had noticed the confrontation whispered to each other, some looking curiously, others moving on, unaware of the full story unfolding before them. To them, it may have seemed like an ordinary street encounter, but for the 5 men, and for anyone paying attention, it had been extraordinary. What had started as a potential act of aggression had turned into a powerful lesson in perception, respect, and humility. The woman's quiet strength, her composure, and her disciplined actions had left an indelible mark on those who had underestimated her. The psychological impact on the 5 men was immediate. Fear mixed with awe, confusion merged with respect, and for the first time, they realized the importance of reading situations correctly, understanding that appearances could be deceiving, and that true strength often hid behind calm composure. They had assumed dominance, only to discover that vulnerability was an illusion, and courage and training were far more powerful than intimidation and numbers. The encounter had exposed their misjudgment in the harshest and most humbling way possible. Meanwhile, the woman continued walking, her focus unbroken, her mind already shifting beyond the encounter. For her, the situation had been routine. Threats and confrontations were part of her world, but the ability to handle them efficiently, without unnecessary aggression, defined her professionalism. She did not gloat, did not linger on the men's fear. Instead, she demonstrated restraint, showing that true power lies in control, awareness, and the ability to act decisively only when necessary. Even as the 5 men gathered themselves, still shaken, there was an unspoken recognition of their failure and her superiority. They exchanged glances, silently acknowledging that they had miscalculated in ways they could never fully undo. Their lessons would linger far beyond this afternoon, shaping how they perceived the world and the people around them. They had underestimated someone who possessed skill, training, and discipline far beyond their understanding, and they had paid the price, not physically, but in the sudden collapse of their perceived control and ego. The street slowly returned to normal, with pedestrians resuming their paths and cars moving steadily along the road. Yet the encounter left an invisible mark, a tension lingering in the air, and a story that the 5 men would remember for a lifetime. The woman, calm and composed, walked on, leaving behind not chaos but an example of courage, precision, and the extraordinary capability that often hides in plain sight. Her quiet strength contrasted sharply with the men's shaken confidence, illustrating a simple but profound truth: true power is measured not by intimidation, but by discipline, awareness, and the ability to act decisively when it matters most. The city slowly returned to its usual rhythm, the hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, and the distant sounds of life carrying on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet for anyone who had witnessed or even sensed the encounter, the memory of that afternoon lingered, like a quiet but powerful reminder of strength, skill, and the consequences of underestimation. The 5 men who had targeted the woman were no longer filled with arrogance or bravado. Instead, they carried a mix of awe, fear, and reflection. They had come expecting to dominate, to intimidate, and perhaps to test someone they assumed was ordinary. What they found instead was a lesson in humility, a demonstration of what true courage and discipline looked like in action. The woman, calm and composed, moved through the city with the same measured pace she had carried from the start. Her steps were precise, her awareness intact, but she did not linger on the confrontation. She had no need to, for the encounter had already proven a point far more powerful than words could express. Strength was not about aggression or numbers. It was about preparation, awareness, control, and the ability to act decisively when necessary. Every glance, every step, every subtle movement she had made during the confrontation had been deliberate, a quiet demonstration of skill honed over years of intense training and discipline. As she walked, it became clear that the encounter was not just a story of intimidation or threat, it was a lesson in perception. The 5 men had assumed weakness based on appearances, their judgment clouded by arrogance and ignorance. They failed to see what was right in front of them, a person capable of extraordinary action, a woman who had trained her mind and body to handle situations most people could not even imagine. Their underestimation had placed them in a position they could neither anticipate nor control, a situation that had forever altered their understanding of courage and power. The city, bustling and unaware, had served as a backdrop for this silent yet profound revelation. Pedestrians passed by, children laughed in the distance, and cars moved steadily along the streets, all oblivious to the lesson that had unfolded. Yet the encounter itself remained significant, not because of violence or drama, but because of what it revealed about human potential. True strength, the story illustrated, is not always visible. It is measured in composure, awareness, and the quiet ability to turn a potentially dangerous situation into a demonstration of skill and mastery. For the woman, the event was a reminder of her own discipline and training, a confirmation that the skills she had honed over years were not just theoretical but practical and powerful. She had faced danger calmly, managed it efficiently, and left the situation with her dignity intact. There was no need for ego or aggression, her actions had spoken louder than any words could. The encounter was not about defeating others for personal gain, it was about exercising control, maintaining awareness, and demonstrating the extraordinary potential hidden within those who prepare themselves fully for the unexpected. The 5 men, now left to process the encounter, would carry the memory with them forever. The fear, shock, and awe they had felt could not be undone, and the lesson learned was one of humility and caution. Appearances are often deceiving. Confidence without preparation is fragile. And true courage is not loud or boastful, it is quiet, disciplined, and capable of extraordinary action when it is most needed. The encounter had stripped away their arrogance, leaving only a profound recognition of the capabilities of someone they had misjudged. As the woman disappeared into the flow of the city, she left behind more than stunned men, she left behind a story, an example, and a reflection for anyone who might pause to observe. Strength, skill, and courage often hide in plain sight. The extraordinary can exist in ordinary spaces. And those who underestimate others based on appearance alone may find themselves facing consequences far beyond what they expect. In the end, the encounter was not just an incident on a city street, it was a testament to the power of discipline, training, and awareness, a story that would inspire and caution in equal measure. It was a reminder that heroism does not always come with a fanfare or announcement. Sometimes, it simply walks calmly, deliberately, and confidently through the world, leaving a silent but unforgettable mark on all who cross its path.